They tried to evict Tom from his fully owned home using fake court papers and threats. Dressed in tactical vests and armed with false authority, the scammers had bullied dozens across the county. But they didn't know Tom's wife was Judge Caroline Hensley, and she was ready with a real warrant. Just wait until you hear how this courtroom twist turned the whole scheme upside down, and why justice didn't just knock. It kicked the door wide open. It started like any other peaceful Tuesday morning on Sandhill Crest Drive in Clearwater, Florida. Tom Hensley, retired aerospace technician and known to his neighbors as the guy who always trimmed his hedges by 8 a.m., was sitting in a patio chair on his porch, nursing a mug of strong black coffee and enjoying the sound of birds over the distant hum of sprinklers. The sun had just crested the oaks when a sudden noise shattered the stillness, the screech of tires and the hard slam of car doors. A white SUV, spotless and imposing, rolled to a jerky stop right in front of his driveway. Slapped on its side were two magnetic decals that read HOA Enforcement Division in a bold all-cap stencil font. It looked official, too official. Before Tom could even set down his coffee, two men climbed out in matching tactical vests, dark sunglasses, and steel-toed boots. Their walk was aggressive. Their radios squawked with static, like they were coordinating with someone. Without so much as knocking or saying a word, one of them pulled a bright orange sheet from a clipboard and duct-taped it directly across Tom's front door. Big block letters screamed, "Notice of immediate eviction." Tom blinked. At first he thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe a prank? But then came the shouting. "Homeowner has failed to comply with corrective actions," one of the men barked, holding up a smartphone as if recording for evidence. "This property is now in violation of HOA enforcement codes. All residents must vacate." The other began waving a flashlight at curious neighbors peeking from their porches. "Step back. Official enforcement in progress. This residence is subject to immediate removal. Do not interfere." Tom stood there frozen, the mug trembling in his hand. "Eviction? What are you talking about?" he asked. "I don't rent. I own this house outright. There's no HOA here. This isn't even a managed neighborhood." The taller of the two men, broad-shouldered, buzz-cut, and oozing self-importance, flashed a badge clipped to his vest. Not a police badge, but something that looked like it came off a novelty website. "You've been served," he said flatly. "You had your chance to contest this. Now it's out of your hands." Tom's voice grew sharper. "Show me your paperwork. I want names. Who signed this? What court issued this order?" The men refused. "We don't answer to individual homeowners," the shorter one said. "We answer to the HOA Compliance Task Force. Step off the porch, or we'll have to remove you ourselves." A ripple of unease spread down the block. People were watching now. A mother clutching her toddler stood frozen by her mailbox. A retiree walking his dog slowed to a halt mid-step. One of the so-called enforcers turned his phone to film Tom directly. "Non-compliant," he muttered, as if documenting something for an imaginary file. Tom wasn't a confrontational man, but he felt his pulse spike. This wasn't some simple misunderstanding. These men were trying to intimidate him on his own front steps, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. Not really. Because watching the entire encounter from the second-story window, her jaw tightening with every word, was Caroline Hensley. And Caroline wasn't just his wife. She was the sitting circuit court judge for all of Pinellas County. And as she pulled out her phone to record and to make a few very precise calls, her eyes didn't blink once. The SUV hadn't even turned the corner when Caroline was already on the move. Her heels pounded down the stairs like gavel strikes in a courtroom, her face drained of color, but her eyes burning with unmistakable purpose. Tom barely had time to open his mouth before she was already flipping through her phone, scrolling through contacts with the speed of someone who knew exactly who to call. "This wasn't just a stunt," she said, her voice crisp and tight as piano wire. "They impersonated law enforcement. They served what they claimed were legal documents, without jurisdiction, without identification, and without any valid authority. That's not a neighborhood dispute. That's a felony." Tom tried to temper her, but there was no stopping the storm now. As a judge, Caroline was trained to maintain neutrality, but this was personal. They had stepped onto her property, threatened her husband, and waved around fake legal orders as if the rule of law was some costume they could wear for fun. She knew the difference between a civil matter and criminal deception, and this was crossing a line she wouldn't let stand. While she coordinated calls with the clerk of court and a contact at the sheriff's department, Tom uploaded the footage from their home security camera to a neighborhood Facebook group. He gave it a straightforward caption. "Anyone else been visited by fake HOA enforcement? This just happened to us." The response was immediate. Within minutes, the post lit up with angry comments and personal stories. Residents from across Pinellas and neighboring counties chimed in with eerily similar accounts. 2 men in dark vests, a white SUV with makeshift logos, and always some kind of urgent HOA violation. They'd arrive unannounced, demand fines in cash or threats of lien filings, and hand over photocopied forms with no signatures or agency letterheads. If questioned, they'd deflect, intimidate, and record video like they were the real deal. Some homeowners admitted they had paid out of fear, $200 here, $500 there, just to make them go away. Elderly couples had received threats of police involvement if they didn't comply immediately. In one heartbreaking post, a widowed veteran described how he handed over $1,000 to keep his name off the HOA blacklist, not realizing there was no such list and no active HOA. As Caroline scanned the thread, a slow, cold fury settled in her chest. These weren't isolated incidents. This was a pattern. A methodical operation targeting confusion, fear, and legal ignorance, especially among older residents. She dug deeper, accessing court call logs from the past year. And there they were, records of vague complaints. Possible HOA scam visit, men claiming to serve papers, dispute over fines, all brushed aside and recorded as civil matters with insufficient evidence. No connections made, no follow-up. Until now. The pieces snapped together like a puzzle she hadn't realized she'd already been working on. These weren't overzealous HOA board members. They weren't neighbors on a power trip. These were impersonators, organized and deliberate, weaponizing fear and confusion to steal under the guise of authority. And they had nearly gotten away with it, until they picked the wrong house. Now they had the attention of a circuit court judge with a legal mind like a steel trap, and the quiet support of a neighborhood full of people ready to speak out. The men had used fear to silence their victims, but this time they'd made a mistake. They had given the law a reason to look back. It was a Friday morning when they came back, brazen as ever. The same white SUV pulled up to the curb, slow and deliberate, as if it belonged there. Only this time a third man emerged with a large shoulder-mounted camera, recording everything from behind mirrored sunglasses. "For documentation," he muttered to no one in particular. One of the fake enforcers stepped onto the lawn, thumbing through a stack of papers that looked more polished than before. They had upgraded their act. Across the top of each sheet were bold headers: Court order to vacate, Article 7, violation HOA enforcement zone. But none bore a seal, a clerk's signature, or a docket number. Just recycled legal jargon pulled from internet templates and strung together to look convincing. This time they weren't just trying to scare Tom, they were building a facade for social media. One more fake win for their highlight reel. What they didn't know was that they were walking into a sting operation. Caroline had spent the last 3 days quietly working with the sheriff's department and the state attorney's office, compiling statements, digital evidence, and call records. Deputies in plain clothes had taken up positions on nearby porches, behind pickup trucks, and even in a landscaping van 2 houses down. Every neighbor on the block had been briefed, and every camera on the street was rolling. Tom, dressed in a simple blue polo and jeans, stepped out onto the porch. "You again?" he said calmly, without a hint of fear. "You didn't get the message last time?" "Sir, we are here under authority of the HOA compliance task for—" That was as far as he got. The front door opened behind Tom and out stepped Caroline, not in casual clothes this time, but in her full black judicial robe. Her expression was unreadable, but her presence was undeniable. In one hand, she held a clipboard with a signed bench warrant. In the other, her judge's identification badge, clipped and gleaming in the sun. "You're under arrest," she said flatly, stepping forward, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "This is an official order from the 6th Judicial Circuit. You're being charged with impersonation of law enforcement, fraud, and attempted extortion. You have the right to remain silent, though I strongly suggest you use it." The man leading the fake operation, who had introduced himself days earlier as Agent Connors, chuckled smugly. "Lady, you can't arrest us. You don't even—" But he never got to finish that sentence either. 2 deputies closed in with swift precision, grabbing him by the arms and bringing him down in one fluid movement. The camera operator dropped his equipment and bolted, but didn't make it far. An off-duty K-9 unit officer, already waiting 2 blocks away, intercepted him near the corner and made the stop. The third man, seeing both of his partners cuffed, didn't even try to run. Caroline didn't gloat. She didn't have to. Instead, she calmly handed the signed warrant to the supervising officer and walked back up the steps to stand beside her husband. She had done her job. Justice didn't need shouting. It just needed to be seen. The investigation moved quickly from there. Under interrogation, the men revealed they had been using falsified eviction notices downloaded from a defunct legal-themed website, tweaking the details for each address. The so-called HOA they worked for was nothing more than an unregistered LLC with a P.O. box in Miami. No board, no bylaws, no oversight. Just an invented authority. The SUV, leased under a front company tied to 2 other shell corporations. And when authorities dug deeper, they uncovered warrants in neighboring counties, charges of impersonation, intimidation, and fraudulent collections from senior citizens. This wasn't their first time, but thanks to Caroline, it would be their last. Tom didn't say a word the entire time. He just stood at the edge of the driveway, arms folded, watching as the same men who had tried to bully and humiliate him days earlier were now being walked in handcuffs across his lawn. The irony didn't escape him. They had tried to make a public example of him, but instead, the street had become their courtroom, and justice had been delivered right where it was deserved. The aftermath came quickly, and this time it came from every direction. Within days of the arrests, headlines splashed across local media outlets. Fake HOA enforcers busted in Clearwater sting. Judge helps expose countywide home scam. Circuit Court turns the tables on impersonators. Reporters circled the neighborhood like clockwork. Caroline declined most interviews, citing judicial ethics, but the story told itself. Video evidence, witness accounts, court documents, and a growing trail of victims. The community wanted answers, and this time they got them. Caroline, composed as ever, presided over the initial pre-trial hearings, laying out the legal framework for the charges. But as soon as the cases moved toward trial, she recused herself, handing them off to another judge to avoid any appearance of bias. She didn't need to see it through personally. Her work was already done. The facts were solid. The charges airtight. The state attorney's office filed a list of felonies that ran longer than the fake court orders the imposters had been handing out. Fraud, criminal impersonation of law enforcement, elder abuse, wire fraud, conspiracy to defraud. Once investigators traced the full scope of their operation, they estimated the group had extracted over $200,000 from unsuspecting homeowners, many of them elderly, confused, and living alone. Tom's home surveillance footage, originally shared just to warn neighbors, was now playing on every major news channel. One clip of Caroline stepping outside in her judge's robe became the defining image of the case: calm, unshaken, law embodied. The county board, embarrassed it had taken this long to connect the dots, introduced emergency legislation. Within weeks, new homeowner protections were drafted for neighborhoods without active HOAs, ensuring that any enforcement activity required certified notice, registered representatives, and law enforcement verification. Civil lawsuits followed, some from victims reclaiming stolen funds, others from homeowners demanding accountability from agencies that had dismissed their earlier warnings. The scam had been large, but the community response was larger. The fear that once silenced people had turned into collective momentum. No one was hiding anymore. As for Tom and Caroline, they returned to their daily rhythm, mornings on the porch, coffee in hand. They didn't seek attention, but the occasional nod from a neighbor, a thank you card slipped into the mailbox, or a quiet, "You helped us all," at the grocery store, reminded them that justice sometimes echoes louder than anyone expects. The men who once strutted up their driveway with fake badges and borrowed confidence hadn't just targeted a home, they'd targeted trust. And they had been met with something they never expected. Not force, not threats, but the exact system they tried to impersonate. Only real and far more powerful. They thought they could play judge and jury, but the judge lived inside. And this time, the court wasn't just in session. It was personal.